What's up, fight fans? I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. You're watching the Neutral Corner for the week of August 6th. The Nooch! Oh, man, I've had a long day. Actually, a long 24 hours. I had an event in Hollywood last night that Tiffany and I went to, and there was an open bar with free drinks, free food. So I had a little bit of food, a lot of free drinks. It was a struggle this morning as I got up to drive out to Santa Monica to shoot about 8 or 9 episodes of 10 Count for Undisputed Champion Network. Then I had to drive back to downtown LA to go to work, then come home, and now I'm shooting this, and then I have plans later on tonight. So it's been a crazy, crazy day, but enough about me complaining. Let's get into some news and notes. Okay, so nothing definite, but a few fights being talked about. The possibility of Felix Verdejo fighting Terry Flanagan on the November 5th Manny Pacquiao undercard. It's looking more and more like it's going to be Pacquiao against Jesse Vargas, but nothing's been confirmed, but that's the leading candidate. But that would be a pretty interesting fight to put on that card, and it's looking like a strong possibility. Demetrius Andrade is supposed to make his return in October against TBA, probably on Showtime. And they're talking about Danny Garcia, Andre Berto later on this year. And I hear the groans, and I get that a lot of people don't love that fight. I don't particularly love it, but it's not that bad of a matchup when you think about it, particularly if they at least, I wish they would bring Thurman and Porter around, at least, there and talk about the winner of that fight, fighting maybe the winner of their rematch, if they're going to do one, something like that. But even if the winner of that fight just faces Keith Thurman early next year, that should be a pretty good thing. My real beef with it is that Danny Garcia has been sitting idle. Berto's been sitting idle. The Thurman and Porter, we probably won't see either of them fight for the rest of the year. So it's just hard to get excited about some of those matchups that really aren't that bad because the guys just aren't fighting often enough and building towards something. Also, I'm hearing that the Luis Ortiz Ustinov fight, that WBA title eliminator, or maybe it was for the regular title, one of the million titles the WBA has, that was going to be on the Canelo Smith undercard. That is off from what I'm hearing. I think, and it was actually Luis Ortiz's side that pulled out. I think he's having issues with his promoter, Golden Boy. He's wanting out of that contract. I don't know the details. I've just seen a couple of things on Twitter today while I was driving home from work. So I really don't know any details, but more to come on that. That's really a buzzkill because even though Ustinov isn't a very good fighter, anytime Luis Ortiz fights, I want to see it. And it was for the WBA. It'd be one step closer to getting Luis Ortiz against the eventual winner of the eventual Fury-Klitschko rematch. So I was actually interested in that fight, and I thought it made that card a lot sweeter because without that fight now, that undercard, they're trying to get Billy Joe Saunders on that Canelo Smith undercard. That hasn't been confirmed. They're talking about it. They're trying to, but nothing's been confirmed with that either. So that undercard still hasn't been put together, and it's now in danger of becoming just a shit card top to bottom. One other thing I really wanted to talk about real quick before I get into the review of last week's action. I saw a clip from... There's a show ESPN does called First Take, which, look, I'm not big on ESPN, period. I really think that they stopped being a sports network years ago, and they started to try to become a political party, a political activist platform. I'm just not with what ESPN has become. But Max Kellerman has taken over for Skip Bayless on that show, along with Stephen A. Smith. And look, anytime Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith would talk boxing, it was just brutal. It was like having a root canal done, right? And Skip Bayless was this Pacquiao guy, and Stephen A. Smith was this Mayweather guy. And they'd both make these illogical, stupid points. Neither of them really know shit about boxing. But Max is on the show now, and they were talking about boxing. I think it was last week following the Terrence Crawford win over Victor Postol. And they were talking about, should Crawford fight Pacquiao? And they were making the arguments back and forth, and I'm not even, that part of it really didn't interest me. What interested me is some of the things that Max Kellerman talked about regarding modern matchmaking in business in boxing with boxing stars. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he pretty much was saying that throughout boxing history in the past, the promoters would kind of manipulate the fighters to making the big matchups that the fans wanted. So it was the fighters kind of getting the short end of the stick, being manipulated and controlled to give the fans what they wanted. Very, very reminiscent of what is going on right now with the UFC and MMA. Those athletes are not being treated very well. I'm not going to say it's unethical because they're signing the dotted line, but it's very reminiscent of how boxing used to be. And Max talked about that. He didn't mention the UFC stuff. He was just talking about the way boxing kind of used to be. And then he talked about this new generation where the fighters are manipulating the fans to getting the best matchups they can get to make the most money they can get with the lowest risk. And of course, you guys know where I'm going with this. Plenty of fighters have been doing it. Roy Jones was a master of it. But Floyd Mayweather just took it to new heights. He's not the only one, though. Let's be honest. Pretty much every big boxing star, going back to, I really think it started in the late 80s to a degree. Now it's just kind of, it's all the American fighters almost. But it really started back then. And it was just a few guys. It was the biggest stars. Now it's lower level guys, it's mid-level guys, it's guys like Danny Garcia, right? It's guys like Adonis Stevenson. There's a million of them I can name. I know Adonis Stevenson's not American, North American, okay? So shut up, I hear you out there making comments already. There's a lot of fighters we could talk about where the networks, the promoters, and the fighters kind of work together to spin a narrative and manipulate fans. Sometimes they use allies they have in the mainstream media, like a Stephen A. Smith, an outlet that Floyd used, right? To manipulate the fans into buying fights or buying narratives behind fights that just aren't true. And it was just a very poignant point from Max Kellerman. I thought it was a really cool clip. If you haven't seen it, go look for it on YouTube. I just look up ESPN First Take, should Crawford fight Pacquiao, should Pacquiao fight Crawford, something like that. And I think it was all that was in like the first 4 minutes of that. And then Stephen A. Smith started talking and it just became a bunch of stupidity and I turned off the clip. But that first part that Max Kellerman was saying, look, whether you like or love or hate Max Kellerman, he knows his shit when it comes to boxing. He really does know his stuff. And he makes some really great points sometimes. He really does, man. I don't particularly love what he does on HBO, the way he calls fights and some of the things he says and the way he goes about it, his style. But when he's just in an interview type scenario or you're just talking boxing with Max one-on-one when the cameras are off, he's a pretty damn smart guy. And that really is, that point he made, it's just very, I just think it's a problem in modern prize fighting, where a lot of these guys, it's highest reward, lowest risk. And I get it, they're the ones risking their lives. But the biggest fights that haven't been happening in recent years or have marinated way past their due date, we always blame networks, we blame promoters, we blame sanctioning bodies. A lot of times, the last guy we look at is the fighter themselves. And I'm telling you guys, more and more, from what I see behind the scenes, off the record, it's the fighters that are mostly to blame for a lot of this crap we're seeing. We had some fun action last week. Last Friday in Quebec, Canada, Adonis Stevenson scores a fourth-round knockout over Thomas Williams Jr., scores knockdowns in the first round and in the fourth round when he ended the fight. This was a fun scrap, and I tweeted about it, that this is probably going to be a fun scrap just because of the styles. But let's be honest. Did this change Adonis Stevenson's standing in the sport? Did it really do anything for him other than make him some money and score a highlight reel knockout? No. But for 4 rounds, it was a fun fight. Williams brought it, which is, the only way he knows to be. He talked a lot of trash. He tried to back it up. He fought with heart. He made Stevenson make adjustments and pushed him a little bit, which was interesting and kind of fun to see. Stevenson, look, sometimes he looks really, really sloppy. He throws really wide looping punches. But when he settles down and starts thinking a little bit, he sets up knockouts. You got to give it to him. He went to the body with Williams, slowed him down. He pulled back a little bit, drew him in and countered him, and he started straightening up the shots. And the left hand that ended it was really short, crisp, straight punch. It was textbook. I say all that, and I say that Adonis Stevenson is a massive pile of shit. If you look at the boxer, he's a good boxer. He's a top 5 light heavyweight. I do not recognize his title at light heavyweight or his lineal claim to the title. That lineage has been perverted. And look, it started with him beating Chad Dawson, who was coming off a very dominant loss. Chad Dawson had killed himself, drained himself 7 pounds to fight Andre Ward. He gave every concession to Ward, but draining weight, he was knocked out in a training camp for that fight, for the Ward fight. It just ruined him. He's never been the same since then. And when he moved back up to 75 to defend his title against Stevenson, ended it with a crushing knockout. But right around that time, Stevenson, I believe he got Fighter of the Year awards. He went on to fight Tavoris Cloud, Tony Bellew, who you could look back now and say that that's probably his best win. And Andres Fonfara, who gave him a hell of a fight and really stretched him and dropped him. Since that Fonfara fight, I don't know if something happened in that fight when he got clipped, when it was harder than he thought it would be. The last 2 years, it's been absolute shit from that guy. Absolute shit. And I just don't care. Now that's him, the boxer, right? I don't think he's going to ever fight the winner of Kovalev Ward. I really don't give a shit what he does until he takes that fight. And the onus is on him. It's not on the other guy. It's just not. I'm not going to argue that with you guys. You should know better. But him as a person, if you know about his past with the human trafficking, the prostitution, beating women, forcing them to fight, forcing them to sell themselves, the things this guy did were beyond criminal. Full disclosure, I was a young criminal one day, but I never went to those lengths. And it's just hard to root for the guy or like him. It's just hard. He could be an entertaining fighter, but he doesn't fight anybody I give a shit. I want to see him fight a top challenge. Until he does, I'm just not going to pay attention. I'm just not going to watch a whole lot. So Elidir Alvarez fought on the undercard of that fight. He won. He's been the mandatory for Stevenson for quite a while. Yvonne Mitchell, the promoter, is saying that they're finally going to fight toward the end of this year. So Stevenson's going to get 3 fights in this year. He'll beat Alvarez because Alvarez really doesn't do much and he doesn't punch very hard. So he'll have 3 defenses this year. But again, I just don't care. The guy's career is wasting away, and I could give a flying fuck what he does. So Saturday, let's talk about, before we get to the big fight at Barclays Center of Brooklyn, there was a card out here in California at Fantasy Springs Casino. Joseph Diaz, my prospect of the year last year, scored a second-round knockout. He's now 21-0 with 12 knockouts. Jojo Diaz doesn't punch with a lot of power, and that's going to be his biggest problem. And that's why I think his ceiling is limited at featherweight, because he just doesn't have the kind of power, and it's going to be a stylistic, it's going to be a challenge for Golden Boy to find good styles for him to win a title, right? If a guy wins a title that doesn't hit very hard or is chinny, expect Golden Boy Promotions to maneuver Jojo Diaz in that direction, right? Because some of the bigger, more harder punching featherweights that have really good chins, it's going to be hard for Jojo to keep them off. But he fought a nobody in this fight. I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean he fought a journeyman, and this was basically a matchup to keep him busy and to get him a knockout. He hasn't had a knockout in a while, so this is just kind of just to keep him going and keep that confidence building. In the main event of this card, this was on HBO Latino, this card, Antonio Orozco scores a unanimous decision in a 10-rounder over Abner Lopez. The scores were 97-93 and 99-91 twice. Now, admittedly, I haven't seen the whole fight. I just saw some highlights of it. But as I mentioned earlier, I shot episodes of 10 Count earlier. I was with Steve Kim, I was with Mike Baca and Doug Fisher, and we were rotating as we shot different episodes. And Steve called the fights for the stream, the live stream. He called the fights, and he thought that Abner Lopez got robbed. And a lot of people that I know on Twitter that I trust have said the same thing. So these were really, really bad scores, perhaps the robbery of the year. It's one thing if Orozco won 96-94 or something, but two of the cards were 99-91, 9-1. And just based off the highlights I saw and some of the articles I've read about the fight, there's no way this was a 9-1 type of fight. So really, really bad scores. And look, for Antonio Orozco, last year when he beat Humberto Soto, I thought that was a good win, and that was at a point where he was going to take that next step. And I thought this year he would be not necessarily challenging for a title quite yet, but right on the cusp, right? He'd be fighting another top 10 guy. He'd be right there. He seems to have not only plateaued, but declined a little bit. And what I find interesting is, Jojo Diaz, who was still really a prospect last year and is just starting to really turn into a full-fledged contender. I won't say full-fledged, but like a junior, baby contender at featherweight. He's further ahead than Antonio Orozco at this point. And if you go back 12 to 18 months, it was the other way around. Now he's just kind of taking him over because he continues to improve and look better. And for Orozco, I don't know what happened. I don't know if something happened in that Soto fight. His team saw something and they just took a step back, but he just doesn't seem like he's going to get any better than this. Like there's been a plateau there. I don't know. But of course, the big fights were at Barclays Center in Brooklyn. And I did a little video at this. I was, after the main event of Santa Cruz, Frampton, I did a little video just on the top of my building. I was up there drinking some beers, and I was like, you know what? Let me take the cell phone, just shoot a little video with some thoughts I had. So make sure you guys check that out. Just I won't go over all those points again. But one of the biggest things for this fight that I just feel no one's really talking about is the crowd. I think the crowd had a big influence on this fight. And we did a preview episode of 10 Count for the Frampton Santa Cruz fight. And I drank the Santa Cruz Kool-Aid a little too much, because when this fight was first announced, I thought it was going to be a close competitive fight. And I really didn't know who to pick at first. I slightly favored Santa Cruz because you just don't know when a guy's moving up in weight. You just don't know until you see them at that weight, right? And we knew Frampton was coming up in weight. So, and then I just thought that in terms of judges, I didn't think that two American judges, because there's two American judges in this fight and one Italian judge, I didn't think that two American judges would be favorable to Frampton. I thought Santa Cruz would get the benefit of the doubt. More on that in a second. But the crowd, the Irish fans who came over and the Irish American fans who were there were just deafening. They're cheering and they're roaring, bled through the TV screen, right? You could hear it when you're watching it on TV. You felt the atmosphere. And for Leo Santa Cruz, who had never been to New York, had never been to the East Coast, he is a California kid, bright, sunny, happy, friendly California. He got a cold, hard truth, an awakening when he went over to the East Coast. And he just saw the harshness. It's a different crowd out there. It's a different atmosphere. And dealing with that harsh Brooklyn crowd and the Irish fight fans and how loud they are. Look, the Mexican fight fans out here are very, very loud and passionate. But those UK fans, they are every bit as loud and passionate. And some would argue even more so. And Leo wasn't prepared for that. I don't know. I think he wanted to win the crowd over, but there was nothing he could do to win that crowd over. Of course, the crowd respected him, but the crowd was all Frampton. And I'm not saying Leo was necessarily intimidated, but I know it was playing on his mind because several times in the corner after the round, he was talking to his dad. He was talking to his corner about the crowd. He mentioned it several times through the fight, especially in the early rounds. And he looked a little flat. He didn't look sharp. He looked confused by Frampton, but he was absolutely thinking about the crowd. And he dug himself a big hole. And he came on late, to Leo Santa Cruz credit. He came on late and made it interesting and made it a close fight. This was not a wide win for Carl Frampton. Some of you out there are saying that, and I completely disagree. I scored at 115-113 for Frampton. I think that was the right score. Some of you out there saw it 116-112. I can live with that. Some of you out there had it a draw, as Guido Cavalieri, the Italian judge, had it. I could live with that too. Anything outside of that's a little too wide for me. But Leo came back. He just had dug such a big hole for himself, he couldn't dig himself all the way out. Let's talk about Carl Frampton a little bit. I mentioned this in my preview episode, the preview episode of 10 Count that we shot a month or so ago, talking about this matchup. Frampton, I thought all along, was the better athlete. He has underrated athleticism. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why. Well, he was the better athlete. He also has better footwork. Light years better footwork. And he's much faster with his hands, but he's faster, way, way faster with his feet than Leo is. And Leo can be a little plodding. And in this fight, didn't necessarily stick the jab out and establish it early. The jab was wavery. It was rubbery. And Frampton was able to get in there, get off, and get out using his footwork and using angles. I love the way he shot uppercuts, which is what you should do against a taller guy. If you're the quicker guy and you can outmaneuver him. He used the hook very, very well. He went to the body and took some starch out of Leo. And even though Leo landed some hard flush shots on Frampton late in the fight, there was just nothing on him. Frampton walked right through him because he had taken some of the steam out of Leo with some of the body work. I thought it was a great, great performance from Carl Frampton. And I think when you consider his win over Quigg earlier this year, which was an ugly fight, it was not very entertaining, but he clearly won that fight. He unified titles at 122 pounds. Took Quigg's, remember, Quigg was undefeated. Then moves up 4 pounds, comes over to the United States for his first fight at featherweight, fights one of the top 10 guys out there, Leo Santa Cruz, in his home country territory, because, look, New York is still America, and beat him, and takes a title there. So now he has titles in different weight classes. I think it's clear Carl Frampton is the fighter of the year. I don't think there's anybody else who could top it. Now, having said that, if Andre Ward defeats Sergey Kovalev in November, and I still, I slightly favor Andre Ward in that fight. I do favor him by decision. I think the Boxing Writers Association of America will award Andre Ward Fighter of the Year. I personally think it'll be bullshit. I think that Carl Frampton deserves it, but I think the BWAA will award it to Andre Ward should he beat Sergey Kovalev. So remember me saying that right now, okay? Also, another thing, this was a very good fight. It was a Fight of the Year candidate. You could argue top 5. It was better than Thurman Porter. Better two-way sustained action and just better skill and craft displayed by both fighters. And I just think pound for pound, just two better fighters, period. I think that Frampton's better than Thurman. And I think that arguably, maybe Porter is better than Santa Cruz. They're probably about the same, but all things considered, better skill, higher caliber of technical display, all of it. I just think that it was better than Thurman Porter, but it was not the fight of the year. It was not the fight of the year. And Carl Frampton, he's on the cusp of being pound for pound. I think you could put him in the top 10 right now. I think you could put him down there at number 9, number 10, somewhere in there. But I don't know if I would I don't know how long he's going to be on that list because he does get hit a lot. He has defensive liabilities. He's going to be undersized at featherweight. And, against some of the top guys, like, look, obviously the next step is to fight Lee Selby in unified titles. And that would be over in the UK. It'd be a massive fight. I don't see it happening this year. I think it'll happen early next year. I think Carl will take a layup in his next fight, an easier opponent. He deserves it. But I do think that fight will happen early next year. I favor Frampton over Selby. I'm not that big on Lee Selby. I think Frampton's better. But I think somebody like Gary Russell could give Frampton a lot of problems. I also think Guillermo Rigondeaux would probably mop the floor with him. And what I like, one thing I do find funny is Guillermo Rigondeaux immediately, 2 seconds after Frampton won this fight, tweeted him. And of course, the Regandites, that's, his cult. I call them Regandites. They were all, retweeting this stuff. Rigondeaux was saying, hey man, I'll come fight you anytime, any place. I'll come over there to your hometown and fight you. Meanwhile, when Lomachenko and his people were offering a fight to Rigondeaux didn't want to move up to fight Lomachenko at 126. More than willing to for Carl Frampton, though. Funny how that shit works, huh? But look, also on this card, Tony Harrison gets a 9th round TKO over Sergey Rabchenko. Tevin Farmer scores a unanimous decision over Ivan Redkach. He looked good in that fight, good skill-wise, but not the most exciting guy. Paulie Malignaggi beats Gabriel Bracero. Who gives a shit? Mikey Garcia, back in business, gets a 5th round TKO win over Elio Rojas. Look, with Garcia, hadn't fought in 2.5 years. Not the most exciting guy on earth. I just don't care until this was at 140. He'll be moving down to 135. That is a pretty weak division right now. Lightweight's pretty weak. Garcia has the talent to clean that division out. Over the next 12 to 24 months, he should be unifying those titles in that division and clearing it out. Until he starts doing that, I don't give a shit. That's just the bottom line. All right, so not a lot of action this weekend. We all know that Andre Ward is fighting Alexander Brand in Oracle Arena. This is going to be on regular HBO. So if you want to watch this fight, check it out. I think Andre Ward will probably carry Brand a little bit the way Kovalev carried his tune-up opponent. But Chilemba, who Kovalev fought, really was a top 10 light heavyweight. And I think Sergey could have got him out of there on his best night late in that fight, but Chilemba was always going to take him rounds and land some shots. Alexander Brand is really, really, really bad. He shouldn't land one hard, clean shot on Andre Ward. Ward should dominate every second of this fight, and he should knock him out. Look for Ward to get a stoppage here and make a statement, and maybe get the drums beaten a little bit for that Kovalev fight. I still have a sneaking suspicion he's going to get injured and the fight with Kovalev will be postponed the next year. Hopefully that's not what happens, but I just have this feeling, man. Call it a hunch. We'll see. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But other than that, not a lot of action going on in August, so I'll probably be off for a couple weeks. We'll get back on later in the month as the big September schedule approaches. So you guys, enjoy the Olympics, but just remember the International Olympic Committee are pieces of shit. The more you learn about them, the more you realize the Olympics are shit. So appreciate the athletes, but the institution of the Olympics, the IOC, they can all suck my dick. I'll see you guys later, and enjoy your month of August.